Well, welcome back, everyone. This presentation is part of the Psychedelics in Therapy Summit from Psychotherapy Networker. I'm Zach Taylor. I'm the director of Psychotherapy Networker and the co-host of this series of webinars on psychedelic-assisted therapy. So somewhere in the late 70s, a family therapist by the name of Richard Schwartz, who you're all here to see, began noticing what back then might have been called subpersonalities in his clients. He noticed they spontaneously began talking about parts inside that were more than just ideas, but actually often held completely different beliefs and behaviors, complete personalities. And so these were more than just different senses of who we are, but distinct parts and subpersonalities. This idea wasn't exactly new. It was something that Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung even talked about through the id, the ego, and the superego. But he began working with them in a kind of new way that he eventually called internal family systems therapy. Because in many ways, these parts operated like a kind of family, with some parts protecting other parts and functioning in very different and distinct roles. So fast forward now to this new emerging field of psychedelics. And it's been found just by observation that in 86% of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy sessions, clients spontaneously begin talking about these subpersonalities or parts and relating to these different parts. And that much of the healing work happens, it seems, when they realize, as you'll see in this webinar, through a real client demonstration, that parts of themselves are frozen in certain memories, times, and places, and that these parts have been sort of cut off from having expression in their waking and conscious life. And that the healing comes when they begin, again, spontaneously relating to these parts differently, bringing them back in, caring for them differently, hearing the pain that they hold through past experiences, and integrating them back into their lives. That observation has led many psychedelic-assisted therapists to learn and utilize this internal family systems model. And it's why we've invited our next speaker to this series of webinars. So in this session, please pay very careful attention to the MDMA session that you're about to witness. It's a edited down 10 minutes of a session that took several hours. But you're about to see how this veteran who has PTSD naturally goes through this process himself with little guidance from the therapist in the room, and actually without any coaching prior to the session to work in this way. Now, there's a lot of IFS language in this session, so take note of the major ways that Richard Schwartz views the typical psyche of a person, whether they're using psychedelics or not. That includes the idea of having a core self, and then parts that we develop over time that includes exiles. These are parts of ourselves that tend to be cut off, which you'll see in the session. Then managers who tend to run our lives on a day-to-day basis, keep us in check, keep exiles cut off even. And then firefighters he'll talk about, which tend to come in, are parts of us that tend to come in when emotions become overwhelming and the managers seemingly can't tend to handle it. These are parts of us that can fly into a rage, for instance, and we kind of tend to become someone that we're not normally in our everyday lives in order to keep the system in check. So again, these are all terms coined by internal family systems therapy and terms you'll hear in this webinar. So I want to introduce and welcome to the Psychedelics in Therapy Summit and this series of webinar, the founder and developer of internal family systems, Dr. Richard Schwartz.
All right, and thank you for the honor of this invitation to wrap things up in this great conference. You know, you've had a number of my friends present, and this is such an exciting time, such an exciting topic for me. I believe that psychedelics not only offer us new opportunities for healing, but also open a kind of portal to the kinds of divine, if you forgive me, wisdom that we need now on our planet. And so this is very dear to my heart. I also have, for the last several years, been on a project to help IFS become at least one of the primary maps to the psychedelic territory, because it does map so well. And as Zach was just saying, my interest began when my friend Michael Mithofer, who spearheads the MDMA and PTSD research for MAPS, and is also an IFS therapist, started telling me about how many people spontaneously, without any cueing from the facilitator, began doing IFS and sort of knew how to do it. And that was just very validating to me, that I had stumbled onto a way that people naturally know how to do when they access enough of what I'm going to call self, that it's an invitation to some of these parts of them that they had locked away to come forward and be seen and actually be helped. And people, I had known from doing this work that when you're in a lot of self, you just naturally know how to relate in a healing way, both to your parts and to other people. But yeah, I was thrilled to hear that, and subsequently got very interested in the combination of IFS and various kinds of psychedelics. And I've assisted with or tried to combine them, not only with MDMA, but I know Phil Wolfson was one of your presenters, and he and I did a 6-day workshop recently on the combination. It was amazingly potent. I plan to continue to explore that combination with ketamine and IFS from here on. I have a big task in a short amount of time, because I think I need to introduce IFS to you. I think many of you don't know much about it, and then describe how it applies to psychedelics. And then, if we have time, I do have a 10-minute video from one of Michael's Mithofer's subjects, who spontaneously, as I said, starts to work with this part that he had locked away in the Iraq War when he saw how violent it could be, and he was afraid of it initially, and then spontaneously let it out of jail and brought it home. So if we have time, I'd like to show that video. We'll have to see. So IFS basic tenets are that everyone's a multiple personality, not in the sense that they have MPD or DID, but that we all have what I call parts, that it's actually a good thing, because we're born with them, and they all have valuable qualities and talents to lend us in our lives. And they assist in a variety of ways when they're not burdened, when they're not locked away, when we have access to them. We don't even notice them, because they're getting along and they're just kind of in the background helping us out. But trauma and attachment injuries have the impact of forcing them out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be destructive, that maybe were necessary when you were young and had no alternatives but to dissociate, or but to binge, or but are no longer needed often, and can cause a lot of trouble in your adult life or your later life. And so good parts forced into roles that can be destructive, that they don't like often, and it is part of their intention to just keep you safe. And as I learned this from clients, none of this came out of my brain. This is all, I'm an empiricist, so I had clients beginning to describe all this to me, and I was quite amazed, and just started to apply my family systems lens onto what these things they were describing, and found through having my client dialogue with these parts, what I just said, that they're not what they seem, and that they're frozen in time, most of them, back during a trauma or an attachment injury. And they think you're still 5 years old and that the world is still very dangerous and they still have to do the jobs they're in. So, and some of them, particularly what other systems might call these vulnerable inner children, are the ones who are the most sensitive and consequently the ones who get hurt the most. And they carry very extreme beliefs about you or about the world, and they carry a lot of the emotions from the trauma that all just get stuck to them. And these we call burdens. So an extreme belief or emotion that came into your system from traumatic experience or some kind of attachment injury and adheres to your parts, almost like a virus, that's the definition of a burden. And once a part becomes burdened like that, it now has the power to make you feel all of that and pull you back into these terrible scenes. And so you naturally, and everybody around you tells you to lock it away and just move on and don't look back and focus on the future. And the impact of that is that you tend to exile all of these wonderful inner child playful parts who before they were hurt, you loved because they gave you all kinds of spontaneity and creativity and delight in the world. But after they get burdened with a sense of you being worthless or shamed or emotional pain or the terror from a trauma, then you stash them away somewhere and you try never to go near them again. And a lot of other parts are then recruited out of their naturally valuable states to become what we call protectors. And they try their best to keep all those exiles contained, and also to keep, if one isn't contained, to get you away from it as soon as possible. So that's parts, and those we call protectors. Oops. Because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to protect these exiled parts from being triggered, because when they're triggered, it's like an explosion of flames of raw emotion that take you out. And they're also trying to keep them contained in different ways. And so some of them try to manage your life so that nothing scary happens and everything's under control and you please everybody. So we call those managers. They're manager parts that in psychedelic world would be called the ego, or the default mode. And these managers are running your life all the time. And some of them are hypervigilant. Some of them are very critical, and they're criticizing you to try and get you to behave or to try and keep you from taking risks. Some of them are caretaking parts. They take care of everybody else. They don't let you take care of yourself, so that everybody's dependent on you and happy with you, but they don't let you take care of yourself. And then there's a whole variety of common manager roles. But despite all their managers' best efforts, the world has a way of breaking through those defenses and triggering your exiles, which there's another set of parts who are waiting around for this big emergency. When you get so triggered and you start to feel all the pain or the shame or the terror the exiles hold, they go into action immediately to get you away from that. And some of them might get you higher than those flames of emotion and have you addicted to something or distract you some way until the flames burn themselves out. But in contrast to the managers who were careful and planful and so on, they tend to be impulsive and reactive and determined, regardless of the consequences to your body or to your relationships, just to immediately get you away. And so we call them firefighters. So it's a very simple map of this inner territory. Managers and firefighters are two classes of protectors, and then exiles are what they are protecting and keeping contained. And most all of us have that map inside of us, that it's hard to come out of a family in this culture without a lot of exiles, not just a family, but our culture in general, and then in need of a bunch of these protectors. So everybody comes out feeling fairly delicate and feeling like the world is fairly dangerous in the sense that it could trigger our exiles all the time. What for me is the biggest discovery, for lack of a better term, of IFS is that in addition to all of these parts, and when they're willing to open space inside, there exists another you that I call the self with a capital S. And I just stumbled onto that discovery because as a family therapist, I was trying to get parts to interact with each other or with the client. And I would have the client talk to the critic maybe. And after I learned that these parts aren't what they seem and they carry these burdens, and also they're frozen in time. They're actually living back like you're 5 years old. They think you're still in the same kind of danger you did back then. As I got all that about parts, and this was just through trial and error, I wanted to have my client have better relationship with them. And so I would set up these dialogues and would find that I could start out having maybe a client talk to the critic. The critic is talking about why it does what it does, but suddenly the client is angry at the critic. And it reminded me of family sessions where I'm trying to have two family members talk to each other. And suddenly a third one interferes and is angry at one of them and screws up the whole interaction. And we were, as family therapists, were taught to get that third party to step out of the room or just step back in the room so they don't interfere. I thought maybe the same thing's happening in this inner system. And so I began asking the one who's angry at the critic to give us some space and just continue the conversation without its influence, and found that as it separated, and maybe the one who's scared of the critic separated, as I could get them to separate, this other person popped out and knew how to relate to the critic in a way that was very soothing and healing, and would manifest qualities like just pure curiosity about why it does its job, and was be calm and confident relative to the critic, and even times would spontaneously say, I feel sorry for it. I can see that this job isn't much fun. And in that state, the critic would soften and would disclose why it was doing its job and what it was afraid would happen if it didn't do its job. And it would talk even about the exiles that it protected by being so critical. And my client, as they listened, would get more empathic, and that would create this whole new relationship. So rather than fighting with it, they're loving it and honoring it for the heroic role it played to try and keep them safe all these years. And then we could find out about the exiles it protects and get permission. We don't go to the exiles without permission from the critic or the other protectors. And then there's a whole process for healing and getting out of where it's stuck in the past, some of these often young, vulnerable parts, and helping them unload the burdens, the extreme beliefs and emotions they carry, at which point, almost as if a curse has been lifted, they will transform into their naturally valuable states. So I'm throwing this, what usually takes me an hour and a half to convey, in about 10 minutes, but that's the basics of IFS. And so how does that apply to psychedelics? Well, so maybe this would be a good time to show that video. This is, as I said, an Iraqi vet who is, as you'll see, Michael's wife Annie give a dose of MDMA, and then the rest is pretty self-explanatory. But the point is that he starts working with this part he used to be terrified of spontaneously on his own without Michael or Annie giving him any hints about how to do that. So here we go.
Great. Glad you have it all on. Are you ready to take your capsule?
Sure. Jump in the inner tube. I just wanted to tell you, I had this this really intense feeling come over my body, and my heartbeat started beating real fast. But I didn't get at first. I started feeling a little afraid, but then once I started breathing, I've never felt that before. I literally felt my heartbeat start to slow down and everything when I started breathing and just relax, and the sensation, and it was amazing how not quickly it went away, but just how in control I felt of making it go away. So usually I've had those feelings. In a way, it kind of felt like when a panic attack kind of comes on, and my heartbeat started, and I felt my whole body flush and get really hot, and then I was just amazed how I was able to not really fight it, but kind of relax.
That's good.
I just thought y'all
Yeah.
might want to know that.
Yeah,
So you
thanks.
may have weight.
So what he just described is what I believe to be the impact of psychedelics in general, and MDMA does it in this particular way, which is it puts, for whatever reason, it puts the protectors to sleep or offline, and then you suddenly access a whole lot of self, and that's what he was describing just now.
I just feel like I should tell y'all something that was just really amazing. It's hard to put it in words. I feel things that would come up, and then every time they would just blow away like sand, and I even purposely tried to think of things bothersome, like money issues or something, and this voice, this part of me, just so wise and so intelligent, just brought this peace over me that just said, you've always been taken care of, you always will be taken care of, there's nothing to worry about. And then it just flows away like sand. And then I tried thinking about that aspect of me that's just really rageful, and also, besides that image I told y'all about of the fighting with them, I had this image of it in a jail cell, I had that.
So just to explain, what he just described is characteristic of self, that everything's okay and everything blows away, and everything's going to be okay. And he's thought about this rageful part that he had locked up, and he had described in their intake how it was stabbing him in the side, and that was something he wanted to work with. So that's where we are.
Part of me is locked up in jail, and it's just it's dark, but it's got bright red eyes, and just really evil. And I thought of that, and I felt I felt like I put that person there, and I went to it and just opened the door and hugged that person, and then the eyes just faded away, and it no longer had kind of an evil look to itself, and like I visualized both of us just taking apart the jail cell and just, you know, like really becoming friends. And then I visualized that image I told you about of me, like it coming out of my hips and it stabbed me in the side and everything. And I just had a strong visualization of me like reaching up where the knife was in my side and taking it out, and like it took my hands off of its neck and didn't choke it anymore, and just like really embraced it. And like, I don't know, I feel like, I don't know, part of me realizes that I think that I was taking that person and keeping him locked up because I was so afraid of him, and then that by putting him in that cell and keeping him locked up, that I was just making it worse for him. And I was really more beneficial if we kind of worked together, and I'd be, you know, I don't know, I just like it was really amazing. I never realized how much I thought I was being the peaceful person, but I didn't realize how much I was punishing that aspect of me. I think maybe in Iraq I saw what it was capable of, and I think I was too afraid to, you know, and a part of me just feels like so bad that I did that to him. I mean, I know it's me, but I just describe it wisely.
Part of you.
Yeah.
But I just, that was really amazing, and I don't know, I just got this amazing sense of just, I guess, wisdom. I really don't know.
Sounds a lot like wisdom to me.
It was really amazing. And even when I try and think of that really rageful aspect of me, like I can't even, I know it's there, but it just doesn't, I really feel like so much more at peace with like everything.
Great.
Like, even if I try and think about Iraq and everything, like I somehow feel like really peaceful about the fact that that's my journey, and that
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
part of me think, I mean, I know this is part of the part of the drug, but when I try and think, am I going to be able to hold on to this this understanding and this somewhat of wisdom, this knowledge that I have now. I mean, just asking myself that question, I feel like it's so profound that I don't think I could really forget it. I really felt like I met that aspect of me. It's just very, very calming, very sage-like, but just was like very comforting, and like I don't. It's amazing how I felt like so much lighter. Like I keep thinking of that aspect of me that I kept in a cage, and
Sounds like that part of you needs some lightness.
I don't know, it feels like I don't feel like best friends now. Like like you want to chat and get caught up, and
Beautiful.
I really feel like you said, that part of me is a protector, and it's not dangerous. And just thinking about it now, whenever I blow up on people or blow up on my wife and get all, angry and yelling at her, I feel like it's because I kept that person locked up. And of course, it's going to be hateful and resentful for being locked up. And so when it comes to the surface like that, it's going to be mean and make people cry. I really feel like letting it breathe and letting it be is just going to be so much better for me.
I think so.
There's this part of me that keeps talking and saying that I should feel bad for keeping that aspect of me. Like part of me that's saying like it's all your fault that you created all those feelings, the anger and all that other stuff. But then I don't know what part of me is saying that, because every time it says that, that sage part of me just says it's part of being human, I don't know why I couldn't have come up with this on my own, but I'm glad I found it.
I'm glad too.
Okay, so basically he was spontaneously doing IFS. If I were working with him without the medicine, I'd be trying to help him do that, to go to that part that he had locked up and bring it back home. And it would have taken much longer, because all of the protective parts that were so afraid of it would be giving me a hard time about it, and I'd have to work with all of them first and get permission. But as you could see, MDMA had the impact of, again, making those parts disappear temporarily for some reason, at which point he accesses a lot of self, and a lot of the phrases he would use about what he was feeling then are characteristic of self. And that's a big invitation for all these exiled parts to come in and finally get some attention. And that's what I find, not just with MDMA, but as I said, I did a collaborative thing with Phil Wolfson with a lot of people, and I was amazed at how the MDMA would take them away, and we would do low dose, and then they would come back after about 12 minutes. But in that state of return, there was just a whole lot of self present, and they could access parts that they couldn't otherwise, and could heal them as quickly as he did in 10 minutes. So that's what I'm very excited about, all that potential. And there are some potential pitfalls that I can get into a little more maybe in the Q&A. But and one of the things I'd also want to bring, because when we did the ketamine training and other times when I've been experimenting with the combination, in the preparatory sessions, it's really important to solicit the protectors who might be afraid to let this happen, and go over all of their fears about, I hate the phrase, I think it's the dissolution of the ego that is described as the effect of psychedelics, and that terrifies the ego. And the ego is just a collection of managers, basically. And so we have to reassure them about that you're not going to dissolve, you're just going to rest for a little while we do more work, and you jump right back as soon as we're done. And what else are you afraid would happen? And we go over the overwhelm and how we're going to handle the overwhelm from any exiles that were to come in. And so we go over all of that in the preparatory session and get permission to go ahead, because as many people find, these parts have the power to override the effects of the medicine. If I can't tell you how many people have said it didn't do a thing for me, and that's because they didn't get permission from a manager that just blocked it all out. And also we'll talk about the intention that the person has for the medicine experience, and hold that up in front of the parts, and go around and almost like a boardroom table, and get input about that intention, and get everybody on board with the intention going in. And as we did that, Phil and other members of the team said it was a much more peaceful kind of experience than a lot of the previous trainings have been, because you didn't have these parts getting scared or reacting in various ways, and they could hold the intention, and then, as I said, when they came back, we could begin to do that work. And then the integration sessions are literally integrating the parts that you run into in this experience in an IFS way. So that's what I'm hoping to bring. I think again, this is a thrilling time, and also really want to make sure that there isn't a social backlash against the movement, because the people are doing it without a lot of these precautions and understandings of the people's experience. So let me just see if there's more I want to say about all that. There are people, there's a woman named Lou Lucas who's doing research on IFS and end of life, because the effect, and this was true for me, when I did high dose ketamine, I really left to the point where I had no connection to my body, and I was just in the non-dual, and that was a blissful state for me. And I came back and felt the constraints of being in a body, and how you feel separate in a way you didn't up there, and how time is a hassle and that doesn't exist in other realms. But I came back also with the conviction that death is just a transition into that non-dual, and that's been very comforting to me, to not have any really, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I don't really have much fear of death anymore. And I used to think, it's a transition, but now I know that there is this other world, that our world is actually quite small comparatively. And so that's, I think, partly why psilocybin and ketamine are so potent to help people at the end of their lives. And also, when you do access that much of the big self, so for me, what I'm calling self is like a photon. It's both a particle in us and also a wave. And you can, through meditating and through psychedelics, you can enter the wave state. And when you do, you don't want to stay there, although some, spiritual traditions encourage you to stay there and to sort of demean this world. For me, it's good to go there and then bring all the wisdom that he talked about, and all the sense of commitment to actually changing and healing this world that comes with a lot of self-energy, to bring that back and both heal in the inner world and also have more courage to heal in the outer world, because courage is one of the 8 words that characterizes what I'm calling self. Oddly enough, they all begin with the letter C. So we already talked about, he talked about calm and curious and confident and compassion, and then courage and clarity and creativity and connectedness. Those are what we call the 8 C's of self-leadership. And that's what psychedelics seems to access in a big way. And when you access a lot of self, as you saw him do, you naturally know how to relate to these parts in a healing way. You naturally know how to relate to other people in a healing way. So IFS, much of IFS is about just helping people access that state which again is simply getting their parts to open space for it and stay in that state while they interact with their parts or while they interact with their partner in couples work or something like that. And we're bringing this now to higher levels of system, to actually some degree to global kinds of issues, and just holding people in self, just bringing more self to this planet now has become a passion of mine. And this is just a simple way to have that happen. So, so I'm really, again, very, very excited about this combination. And and for me, too many people believe that the healing is all about the medicine itself. And for me, the medicine opens a portal and permits a lot of healing to happen, but it doesn't necessarily cause it. And so for me, too many facilitators sit passively through the session, extending, a nice energy to the subject, but they're missing opportunities to actually do things like what this guy did, because that sometimes takes some active guidance from the facilitator. And also, the IFS work helps keep the facilitator's parts in check, because instead of, and this sometimes happens, that the protectors go to sleep, the managers go to sleep, and in come these scary parts. Let's say that Rage, who initially looked so scary with the beady eyes and red eyes and stuff, let's say it just came in and totally took over him. And it looked like he was having a rage attack, or he was yelling these profanities or whatever he was doing. And if you don't think of, okay, here's a part that just came in and we need to help it, and I need to talk to it to help it trust it's safe to separate from him so he can help it too, which is basically what we do. If you don't think of it that way, and you think, oh my God, he's having a rage attack, or oh my God, he's having a panic attack, or whatever it is, it's much harder for you to stay in self as a facilitator, and you don't have the same clarity about how to help this not keep happening. So for me, too many people stay passive but present through these kinds of medicine sessions. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. Zach, should I keep going, or should we take some questions?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Let's bring our audience in, give them a voice, and see where it goes. If you have more to say,
sure,
go for it. Lots of reactions to the video. I want to acknowledge just the bravery of the person who experienced this, and I know you do as well.
And I love the fact that he's giving us permission to use it.
Yeah, right. And I want to make sure it's clear that we do have permission to show this video. So one of the things that came up several times in the Q&A is that he had a little bit of a fear that this wouldn't last. And I'm wondering what you would have done in that session, in that moment, to help him anchor in this change. And I want to just do a second part of that question. A lot of people picked up on the fact you said kind of puts protectors to sleep in a way so that you can do this work. So the question came up of what happens, maybe this was part of his fear.
What happens when they wake up? Yeah.
What happens when they wake up?
Yes, two really good questions. So the first one, and again, this is something that I think IFS can bring to the psychedelics community, is now he's got this new relationship with this part. The protectors will come back, but the fact that he has transformed this part and now they can see it is very different, and they can see that it's not a big threat, allows for the lack of backlash. But I went into this whole world worried about that backlash that you just mentioned, because in other situations, when we bypass protectors and go to exiles, they get pissed about it and they come back and they punish the client and the therapy relationship. But and occasionally we'll find that in the psychedelic sessions. But I think the difference is that you're accessing so much self that when they do come back, self can reassure them, and they see that there is this self more than they do otherwise when they're usually running things, who has all those qualities you described and can lead things. And that seems to prevent the kind of backlash that I expected. And there, what was the other question?
Well, how would you have helped him in the session when he said, I'm afraid this won't last?
Yeah. So the other thing I want to bring is that you don't have to just do a few integration sessions where the therapist is reminding you what happened and so on. This starts an active process that you do at home on your own, ideally every day. And it becomes a life practice, so that, my instructions to him would be, tomorrow when you wake up, just go to that former rage and see how he's doing, and if he needs anything more from you, or if he wants to tell you about the parts he was protecting, or if he wants to do, and people can do a huge amount on their own with this. So that's what keeps it going.
Got it. So let's see. Jonathan asks, what happens to the protector parts once the exiles are reconciled with the person? You mentioned this in your introduction, but let's maybe go over it again. What happens to these protectors once they go along with this and they let the exiles reintegrate, come back into the person's life? Where do the protectors go?
Yeah, well, that's their question. Often they want to know, what the hell am I going to do now? Are you going to get rid of me? So we have to be very reassuring that no. First of all, we'll ask them, do you really like this job? And most of the time they say no, but I didn't think I had a choice. And I said, well, if you did have a choice, because now what you had been protecting is healed, you do have a choice. What do you want to do? What would you like to do if it were totally up to you? And you'd be amazed at the answers to that question. It's often the opposite of the role they've been in. So the critic wants to be your cheerleader, or the one who keeps you small wants to help you get out there, and so on. So this whole IFS thing is all about transformation. Every part, there are no bad parts, which is the title of the book I wrote recently, and every part gets to return to its sort of naturally valuable role.
Yeah, I think that's important to reemphasize that these protector parts originally had these very creative, as you said in the beginning, spontaneous, creative, playful qualities to them, and now they get to return to that.
That's
and
right.
It sounds like after the session, in integration sessions, you might work with someone to help those protectors find those roles.
Exactly right. And we might need to get them out of where they're stuck in the past. But once they see that what they've been protecting is different, in his case, they don't have to work so hard to contain that rage that, did get triggered with his wife, he mentioned a few times, and so on.
Yeah.
But they start to relax and they can start thinking about other things to do.
Yeah. So Deborah said, it sounds like you prefer ketamine over MDMA after your recent training with Phil. Is that necessarily true?
No, it's not necessarily true, but ketamine is accessible. It's the legal one.
Right.
So, when MDMA is legal, I hope to do similar kind of things.
Right. Do you find working with MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin, that they access different parts of self differently?
The main difference I find is that with MDMA, for example, you don't leave. You stay here in your body, and your heart that C word, compassion, gets magnified. Your heart opens enormously. When I took it, I I totally fell in love with this facilitator who didn't know what to do with that. And so your heart opens enormously, and that's a big invitation for all these exiles to come in and get some healing. With ketamine and to maybe a lesser degree psilocybin, you do leave for a period of time and you touch into that greater self that I was describing, such that when you come back, you're in this really pure state of self often, which again is an invitation to all these parts to come back.
In your ideal world, would you work with someone in some preparation sessions with IFS before doing a psychedelic treatment, or would that just be their first introduction?
Oh, would I just do some IFS first?
Right.
Well,
right.
yeah, when I started to do before I did the training with Phil, I was very, I thought, we do pretty well without the medicine, but we get stuck once in a while, and maybe this will help with the clients we get stuck with. And then after that training, I was much more enthusiastic about the whole process, because not only does it help you get unstuck, but you can get to places that people take years to try in regular therapy or even in IFS therapy to get to in some cases. I mean, most of the time we can get places pretty quickly, but I was amazed at how much could be done in a short period of time because you're accessing so much. So forget your original question, but I do think it's good to do some connecting kinds of things. And what I didn't talk about today, which is crucial, is the self of the therapist or the facilitator. That if you can hold those qualities while you're with the person, self is contagious. So myself will pull for yourself, and we can create an atmosphere of self-energy that is also very healing and very inviting to all these parts. And so for facilitators, that's another thing I want to bring, is to help facilitators get to know the parts of them that might interfere and be able to hold that state.
What I love about learning internal family systems, especially if you're going to work with clients who are in psychedelic assisted therapy, or you're going to do integration sessions afterwards, just in your own private practice, is it gives you, as Dick said, a map. A map of what they've experienced. And Gabor talked yesterday a lot about the importance of the facilitator and the facilitator guiding. And very often in this work, we talk about guidance. For those of us, who don't, haven't trained with a shaman or something, or someone who really has done this their whole lives, IFS provides a kind of beautiful map to help clients, especially when they're confused about what happened to them or what they went through. So
and a very non-pathologized map, so that scary things happen, but it's just a part, and it's a part like his, which is stuck in a role. It's not something pathological. It's not dissociated. Your client's not dissociating. There's a part who came in to take them out for some reason, and we need to talk to it about why. That's all.
Yeah. Lauren asked a question about the inner critic. The inner critic is something we talk a lot about in therapy trainings. They talk a lot about one's inner critic. How does the concept of inner critic fit with IFS?
Yeah, well, I think I was saying that as you get to know these quote unquote inner critics, they're young too, and they're, like in family therapy, we would call them parentified children, parentified inner children. They take on a lot of responsibility for keeping the whole system safe, and all they know to do, like a parentified child in a family, is to yell at you to try and get you to behave, and that they'll call you all kinds of names to try and shame you into either achieving more or looking better, or sometimes these critics are yelling at you to try and tear down your confidence so you don't take any risks, and they can keep you safe that way. But it's always with a positive, protective intention. And so the vilification of inner critics in our field is a huge mistake that I'm trying to reverse.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Someone with a history of dissociation, looks like Angie asked this question. Someone with a history of dissociation, and particularly DID, that's dissociative identity disorder. She's asking, is psychedelic therapy contraindicated in that case, or would it be extremely beneficial in that case?
I think it's hard to predict. The DID clients that I've worked with, their alters, which for me are just their parts, but more disconnected and more polarized,
mm-hmm.
have they have more fear of going to sleep or disappearing
mm-hmm.
than most clients. And so they're more apt to have backlash. And when I'm working with DID clients and I'm getting to know these alters, and then I'm asking, would you guys be willing to open some space? They'll say, there's nobody going to be there if I do. It's
mm-hmm.
just going to be emptiness, and that's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to do a lot of promising that that's not going to happen. It's actually, they're going to like the person that pops out.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes a lot of work. And with psychedelics, that happens very quickly. So I am more concerned about that population trying this,
mm-hmm.
unless they have a really close relationship with the therapist who's with them the whole time.
Sure. So you just did ketamine and IFS training. Are there going to be more IFS-based psychedelic trainings in the future?
Yeah, I'm with a woman who was assisting us with Phil, named Sunny Strasberg. We're going to do I think I'm probably ultimately going to do a series of retreats for the public, not necessarily for therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And then Phil and I are going to co-lead another one of these sometime next winter, I think. I can't remember the date exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there is that plan in the works.
Awesome. Dick, I'm going to give you the last word on psychedelics and IFS and the Psychedelics in Therapy Summit. Any takeaways, anything you hope people will walk away with, maybe not just from your session, but just in your thinking about psychedelics the last few years? What would you leave us with?
I think what I would say is what I hinted at earlier, which is that, yes, these are very powerful medicines, but in and of themselves, they don't heal. Mm-hmm. And that facilitators need to be more active, need to be clear guides about how to navigate, such that, I've worked with a lot of post-psychedelic people who got in touch with things they hadn't gotten in touch with before, but now feel much more vulnerable because they didn't heal it.
Mm.
Now that part is just around all the time, and that's very scary. So there needs to be more direct action from the facilitator to make sure these parts get unburdened and transformed. So I think that's the main thing I would say.
I don't think you could have picked a better takeaway, because so much as these become more popular, more of our clients are going to come in, and this audience is 99% therapists. Mm-hmm. Our clients are going to come in having had experiences of being opened up by these medications and
right.
these drugs, and not know always what to do with those feelings, those experiences, those images, the thoughts. IFS is one model that can help you help those clients, whether their experience was yesterday or 10 years ago. These are such powerful experiences. Clients we often carry them for the rest of our lives.